The flames were already licking through the second-story windows of the boarding house when Zara Mitchell smelled the smoke seeping under her door. And by the time she reached for the handle, the metal was hot enough to burn her palm. It was June 1878 in Wichita, Kansas, and the dry summer had turned every wooden structure into kindling waiting for a spark. Zara stumbled backward, clutching her scorched hand, her heart hammering against her ribs as the realization hit her with terrible clarity. She was trapped. The smoke thickened rapidly, turning the air in her small rented room into something dark and choking. She rushed to the window, fumbling with the latch, her fingers trembling as the heat grew more intense behind her. The glass was stuck, painted shut by years of neglect, and no matter how hard she pulled, it would not budge. Down on the street below, Lucas Pearson had just finished loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the screams. He turned to see thick black smoke pouring from the upper windows of the boarding house, flames already consuming the first floor with a hunger that made his blood run cold. People were gathering, shouting, forming a bucket brigade that Lucas knew would be useless against a fire this fierce. Then he heard it, a woman's voice calling for help from the second floor, and without thinking, without hesitating for even a moment, he was running toward the building. Someone grabbed his arm. "You cannot go in there. The whole place is coming down." Lucas shook him off, his jaw set in determination. "There is someone inside." He hit the front door at a full sprint, his shoulder connecting with the wood hard enough to send it crashing inward. The heat struck him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Flames roared on either side of the narrow hallway, feeding on the old wallpaper and dry wood with terrifying speed. Lucas pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth, squinting against the smoke as he searched for the stairs. The fire had already consumed most of the first floor, but he could see the staircase ahead, still partially intact though flames were crawling up the banister like orange serpents. He took the steps 2 at a time, feeling the wood groan and shift beneath his boots. The second floor was filling with smoke so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead. "Where are you?" he shouted, his voice rough. "Here, I am here." The voice came from his right, desperate and frightened. Lucas followed it, keeping low where the air was slightly clearer, his eyes burning and watering. He found the door and kicked it open. Through the haze of smoke he saw her, a young woman with long dark hair pressed against the far window, coughing violently. She turned when he entered, her eyes wide with terror and hope. "Come on." Lucas crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching for her hand. Zara did not hesitate. She grasped his hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to fire and chaos. His grip was strong, calloused, real. "The stairs," she managed between coughs. "I know. Stay close to me." They moved back into the hallway together, and Zara's heart sank. In the brief minutes since Lucas had climbed them, the fire had claimed more of the staircase. Whole sections of the steps were missing now, consumed by flames, and the structure was clearly unstable. Lucas assessed it quickly, his mind racing through possibilities. "Can you climb?" he asked. "What? Out the window. Can you climb down?" Before Zara could answer, there was a tremendous crack, and part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, sending up a shower of sparks and burning debris. Lucas pulled her back against him protectively, shielding her with his body. When the immediate danger passed, he looked around frantically. The fire was closing in from all sides now. They had minutes at best. "The roof," Lucas said suddenly. He spotted a narrow door at the end of the hall. "That has to lead up." They ran for it, the heat so intense now that Zara felt like her skin might blister. The door opened onto a cramped stairwell, and they climbed up into marginally cooler air. The roof access was a simple hatch, and Lucas pushed it open, helping Zara up and out into the evening air. She gasped, drawing in lungfuls of clean air, her whole body shaking. Lucas climbed out after her, already looking around for a way down. The neighboring buildings were too far to jump to, and the fire was spreading fast. Then he saw it, the old oak tree that grew beside the boarding house, its thick branches reaching out toward the roof edge. "Can you make that jump?" he asked Zara, pointing to the nearest branch about 6 feet away. Zara looked at the gap, then down at the street far below where the crowd had grown larger. She felt dizzy, terrified, but she nodded. "I can try. I will go first, catch you if you slip." Before she could protest, Lucas was backing up, getting a running start. He sprinted across the roof and launched himself into the air, arms outstretched. For a heart-stopping moment, he seemed suspended above the deadly drop, and then his hands connected with the branch and he hauled himself up, moving along it until he was in a stable position. "Your turn," he called. "I am right here." Zara felt the roof shift beneath her feet, heard the ominous groaning of the structure giving way. She did not let herself think. She ran and jumped, her arms windmilling, her stomach dropping as she flew through the air. Her hands caught the branch, but her grip was not strong enough and she started to slip. Then Lucas was there, his hand clamping around her wrist with iron strength, pulling her up and in until she was clinging to the branch, her face pressed against the rough bark. "I have got you," he said, his voice steady despite the exertion. "You are safe now." They climbed down together slowly and carefully until their feet touched solid ground. The moment they did, Zara's knees buckled and Lucas caught her, supporting her weight as the crowd surged around them. Someone brought water and Lucas made sure Zara drank first, his hand gentle on her back as she coughed and sputtered. "You saved my life," she said when she could finally speak, looking up at him with eyes that were red from smoke but clear with gratitude. "You could have died." Lucas met her gaze and something passed between them in that moment, something that neither of them could name but both of them felt. "I could not leave you in there." The boarding house collapsed with a thunderous roar, sending up a pillar of sparks into the darkening sky. Zara flinched and Lucas's arm tightened around her shoulders protectively. She realized she was still holding on to him, her fingers gripping his shirt, and she should probably let go but somehow could not make herself do it. "Where will you go?" Lucas asked. "Do you have family in town?" Zara shook her head. "I came here 3 months ago from St. Louis. I work at the general store. Everything I owned was in that room." She felt tears welling up, the shock finally hitting her. She had nothing. No clothes, no belongings, not even a place to sleep. Lucas made a decision. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, but there is a spare room. You can stay there until you figure things out." Zara looked at him, this stranger who had risked his life for her without a second thought, and saw nothing but genuine concern in his face. "I cannot impose on you like that." "You are not imposing, I am offering." He gave her a small smile. "Besides, I am headed back there now anyway. It would be poor manners to leave a lady stranded." Despite everything, Zara found herself smiling back. "Then I accept. Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Lucas Pearson. But please, just Lucas." Zara Mitchell. She held out her hand, then laughed at the absurdity of the formal gesture after everything that had just happened. Lucas laughed too, a warm sound that somehow made the whole terrible evening feel a little less dire. He shook her hand anyway, his grip firm and warm. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Mitchell, though I wish it had been under better circumstances." They walked to his wagon together, and Lucas helped her up onto the seat before climbing up beside her. As they rolled out of Wichita, Zara looked back at the still burning building, at the life she had been trying to build in this frontier town, and felt a strange sense of something ending and something else beginning. She glanced sideways at Lucas, taking in his profile in the fading light. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. There was ash smudged across his forehead and burns on his hands that he had not even acknowledged. He had run into a burning building for her, a complete stranger. The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving Zara exhausted and sore. Every breath still hurt a little from the smoke, and her burned palm throbbed. She cradled it in her lap, trying not to wince. Lucas noticed. "We will get that tended when we get home. I've got salve that works well for burns. You seem to speak from experience. Ranch work is not exactly safe. I have had my share of injuries." He paused, then added, "Though I have never had to jump out of a burning building onto a tree before." That was a first. "For me too," Zara said dryly, and Lucas laughed again. The Pearson ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, a modest spread with a sturdy house, a barn, and several outbuildings. It was not grand, but it looked well maintained and welcoming in the twilight. Lucas pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Zara down. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. Lucas led her to a washroom and brought her clean water and the promised salve, along with one of his shirts since she had nothing else to wear. "It will be too big, but it is clean," he said. "I will give you some privacy. Come out to the kitchen when you are ready." Zara washed the ash and soot from her skin, changed into the oversized shirt that hung to her knees, and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had woken up in her boarding house room, worried about nothing more serious than whether Mrs. Henderson would mind if she was a few days late with the rent. Now she was standing in a strange man's house, wearing his clothes, with literally nothing to her name except the scorched dress she had been wearing. She should be terrified, or at least more cautious, but somehow she felt safe here. Lucas Pearson did not seem like the kind of man who would take advantage of her situation. When she emerged, she found him in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken. He had washed up too, changed his shirt, though she could see the burns on his hands were worse than she had realized. "Let me look at those," she said, moving toward him. "They are fine." "They are not fine. Sit down." To her surprise, Lucas obeyed, taking a seat at the table. Zara carefully examined his hands, noting the angry red burns across his palms and fingers. She applied the salve gently, trying to be as careful as possible, but she saw him wince. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Nothing to apologize for. You are good at this." "I helped my mother nurse my younger siblings through various injuries and illnesses growing up. You learn to be gentle." She finished bandaging his hands and stepped back. "There. Now you eat while I finish preparing this food. You have done enough for one day." They ate together at the simple wooden table, and the silence that had been awkward on the wagon ride now felt comfortable, companionable. Zara found herself watching Lucas when she thought he was not looking, noticing small things. The careful way he moved despite his injuries, the kindness in his eyes, the laugh lines around his mouth that suggested he smiled often. "May I ask you something?" Lucas said after a while. "Of course." "What brought you to Wichita? You said you came from St. Louis." Zara set down her fork, choosing her words carefully. "My parents died last year within months of each other. My father first, then my mother. I have siblings, but they are all married with families of their own. I was the youngest, and I felt like a burden on them, so I decided to make my own way. Wichita seemed like a place where someone could start fresh." "I am sorry about your parents." "Thank you. What about you? Have you always been a rancher?" Lucas nodded. "This was my father's place. He died 2 years ago, left it to me. It is not a big operation, just me and a couple of hired hands who help during busy seasons. We run cattle, some horses. It is a good life, if a lonely one sometimes." There was something in the way he said it that made Zara's heart ache a little. She understood loneliness. She had felt it keenly since coming to Kansas, even living in a boarding house full of people. "Well," she said, managing a smile, "I suppose neither of us was expecting our paths to cross the way they did." "No," Lucas agreed, meeting her eyes, "but I am glad they did. Even if the circumstances were terrible." Zara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire she had survived. She looked away, suddenly shy. "I should let you rest. You must be exhausted." Lucas showed her to the spare room, which was small but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed and a window that looked out over the darkened prairie. "If you need anything, I am just across the hall," he said. "Do not hesitate to wake me." "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." He nodded, lingering in the doorway for a moment as if he wanted to say something more, but then he just wished her good night and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Zara lay in the unfamiliar bed, her body aching and her mind racing. She kept replaying the fire, the terror of being trapped, and then Lucas appearing through the smoke like something out of a story. She thought about his determination, his bravery, the way he had not hesitated even though he could have died. She thought about his hands, burned because he had pulled her to safety. She thought about the way he had looked at her over dinner, with a warmth that made her feel something she had not felt in a very long time. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to someone who had saved her life. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The next morning, Zara woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. She dressed in Lucas's shirt again, having nothing else, and ventured out to find him in the kitchen, making breakfast with bandaged hands that clearly made the task difficult. "Let me help," she said, and before he could protest, she took over at the stove. "You should not be using those hands more than necessary." They fell into an easy rhythm, Zara cooking while Lucas set the table and poured coffee. It felt strangely domestic, comfortable in a way that should have been impossible between two people who had only met the night before. Over breakfast, they talked about practical matters. Zara would need clothes, and her job at the general store was surely wondering where she was. Lucas offered to drive her into town, but Zara hesitated. "I cannot keep taking advantage of your kindness," she said. "You have already done so much." "It is not taking advantage. I need to go into town anyway to replace the supplies that were damaged in the fire." He paused. "Besides, I would like to make sure you are settled properly. After what happened, I feel somewhat responsible." "You are not responsible for me." "Maybe not. But I would like to help anyway." The sincerity in his voice made Zara's resolve crumble. "All right, thank you." They drove back to Wichita together, and the town was still buzzing with talk of the fire. The boarding house was a blackened shell now, still smoking in places. Several people stopped to stare at Zara and Lucas, and she could see the speculation in their eyes. Word traveled fast in a small town, and she knew people would be talking about how she had spent the night at Lucas Pearson's ranch. At the general store, her employer, Mr. Davies, was shocked but relieved to see her alive. "We heard you were in that building. Thank God you got out," Zara explained what had happened, and Mr. Davies's gaze shifted to Lucas with new respect. "You are a brave man, Pearson. Not many would have done what you did." Lucas looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Mr. Davies said firmly. "They would not have. You are a hero." The words seemed to make Lucas even more uncomfortable, and Zara found herself wanting to spare him from the attention. She changed the subject, asking Mr. Davies about work, and he assured her that her job was still waiting whenever she was ready to return. The problem of clothes was solved by the general store itself, which carried a small selection of ready-made dresses. Mr. Davies, moved by Zara's plight, offered to give her a dress at cost and let her pay it off from her wages. She picked a practical calico dress in blue, along with necessary undergarments, and changed in the back room, finally able to wear something that fit properly. When she emerged, Lucas's expression changed in a way that made her pulse quicken. He had seen her only in his oversized shirt or covered in ash and soot. Now, clean and properly dressed, she caught him looking at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "You look well," he said, and then seemed to think that was inadequate. "I mean, the dress suits you." Zara felt herself blushing. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies and talking to various townspeople. The story of the rescue had spread quickly, and everywhere they went, people wanted to hear it firsthand. Lucas bore the attention with quiet grace, always deflecting praise and insisting he had just done what anyone would do. But Zara saw how the women of the town looked at him, with admiration and interest, and she felt a twinge of something that might have been jealousy. By early afternoon, they were ready to head back to the ranch. As they climbed onto the wagon, Lucas hesitated. "Zara, I want you to know that you are welcome to stay at the ranch as long as you need to. I know you have your job here in town, and I can drive you back and forth until you find a new place to stay. Or, if you prefer, I could ask around about other boarding houses." Zara looked at him, at this man who kept giving and giving without asking for anything in return. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Lucas seemed to consider the question carefully. "Honestly, at first it was just the right thing to do. You needed help, but now—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "Now I find I enjoy your company. The house feels less empty with you there." "If that is too forward, I apologize." "It is not too forward," Zara said softly. "I enjoy your company too, and if the offer is genuine, I would like to stay at the ranch a while longer. It is peaceful there. It is genuine." As they rode back to the ranch, Zara felt something shifting between them, like the first movement of tectonic plates before an earthquake. She was acutely aware of Lucas beside her, of every time his arm brushed against hers, of the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She was attracted to him. She could admit that to herself. More than attracted. There was something about him that called to her, something steady and good and true. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Lucas would drive Zara into town each morning, drop her at the general store, then return to his ranch work. In the afternoons, he would come back to collect her, and they would ride home together, talking about their days. In the evenings, they would cook dinner together, eat, and then sit on the porch as the sun set over the prairie, sharing stories and dreams and gradually learning each other's hearts. Zara learned that Lucas had wanted to be a teacher when he was young, but had given up that dream when his father got sick, and he needed to take over the ranch. Lucas learned that Zara loved to read, that she had taught herself French from a book she found in a second-hand shop, that she was surprisingly good at poker. They laughed together, easily and often. They fell into comfortable silences that felt as intimate as any conversation. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not a single moment, but 1,000 small ones. It was Lucas teaching Zara to ride one of his gentler horses, his hands on her waist as he helped her mount, lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary. It was Zara mending his torn shirt with careful stitches, her fingers brushing against his chest as she measured the fabric. It was the way they started to anticipate each other's needs, moving around each other in the kitchen like dancers who had practiced their steps for years rather than weeks. It was the morning. Lucas came back from checking on the cattle to find Zara gathering wildflowers near the house, the sun catching in her dark hair, and realized that he could not imagine his life without her in it anymore. It was the evening Zara looked across the dinner table at Lucas, at the way the lamplight softened his features, and understood that she had given him her heart without even meaning to. 6 weeks after the fire, they were sitting on the porch together, watching the stars come out. Lucas had been quiet all evening, and Zara could sense he had something on his mind. "What is it?" she asked gently. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. "Zara, I need to say something, and I hope I do not overstep. If I do, please tell me and we can forget I ever spoke." Zara's heart began to beat faster. "Go on." "These past weeks, having you here, they have been the happiest I have been in years, maybe the happiest I have ever been. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you at breakfast. When I am working, I find myself watching the sun to gauge how soon I can come collect you from town. When we sit here like this, I think about how perfectly right it feels." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw everything she had been feeling reflected back at her. "I am in love with you, Zara. I think I started falling the moment I saw you trapped in that room, and I have been falling ever since. I know it has not been long, and I know you did not come here looking for this, but I had to tell you the truth." Zara felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears. "Lucas, I love you too. I have been trying trying to tell myself it was too soon, that I should not feel this way about someone I have known for such a short time. But I cannot help it. You are the kindest, bravest, most wonderful man I have ever met, and every day I am with you, I fall a little more in love." Lucas reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then marry me. Make this your home, not as a guest, but as my wife. I cannot promise you riches or an easy life, but I can promise you that I will love you and cherish you every single day for the rest of my life." "Yes," Zara said, not even needing to think about it. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. It felt like every moment since the fire had been leading to this, like they had been meant to find each other, even if it took a burning building to make it happen. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wichita. Mr. Davies gave Zara away, moved to tears at the whole romantic story. The town turned out in force, everyone wanting to see the couple whose love story had begun in such dramatic fashion. Zara wore a simple white dress that she and Lucas had picked out together, and Lucas wore his best suit, his hair finally properly cut. When they exchanged their vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Zara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous and eager and so deeply in love that every touch felt sacred. Lucas was gentle with Zara, patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs to share, and Lucas traced patterns on her bare shoulder with his fingertips. "I keep thinking about that night," he said quietly. "If I had been 5 minutes later leaving town, if I had not heard you call out, if anything had been different, I might have lost you before I ever had the chance to know you." Zara turned to face him, cupping his cheek with her hand. "But you did not. You saved me, and now we have our whole lives ahead of us." "Our whole lives," Lucas repeated, like he was tasting the words, finding them sweet. "I like the sound of that." Life on the ranch was hard work, but Zara took to it with determination. She learned to cook for ranch hands when Lucas hired help during busy seasons. She learned to tend the vegetable garden she planted near the house. She learned about cattle and horses and the 1,000 practical skills a ranch wife needed. Lucas was patient with her learning process, teaching her without condescension, respecting her intelligence and capability. But it was not just work. There was joy too, so much joy. There were morning rides across the prairie, just the two of them and the endless sky. There were lazy Sunday afternoons reading together in the shade of the porch. There were nights of passion and tenderness, of learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts. There were inside jokes and shared dreams and the deep contentment of two people who fit together perfectly. A year and a half after their wedding, Zara gave birth to their first child, a boy they named James after Lucas's father. Lucas wept when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. He was a devoted father, doting on James while still making sure Zara never felt neglected. He would wake with the baby in the night, walking the floor with the crying infant so Zara could rest. He would sit on the floor playing with James for hours, making silly faces and cooing nonsense that made Zara laugh from across the room. "You are wonderful with him," she told Lucas one evening, watching him rock their son to sleep. "He is ours," Lucas said simply. "How could I be anything else?" 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny fierce creature they named Rose. She had Zara's dark hair and Lucas's eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her little finger. Lucas loved both his children equally but differently, protective of his daughter in a way that sometimes made Zara tease him gently. "She is 3 months old, Lucas. I do not think she is going to start courting just yet." "Good. She can wait until she is at least 40. Zara laughed, taking Rose from his arms and settling into the rocking chair to nurse her. Lucas sat beside her, James climbing into his lap with a book he wanted read. This, Zara thought, looking at her little family gathered together in the soft evening light, this was everything she had ever wanted without knowing she wanted it. The years passed in the way they do for happy people, quickly and full of meaning. The ranch prospered under Lucas's careful management. They added onto the house, building a proper parlor and expanding the bedrooms. They took in a stray dog that James found by the creek, and it became a beloved part of the family. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and difficult harvests, but they weathered them together, and that made all the difference when James was 8 and Rose was 6. Zara found herself pregnant again, a surprise that delighted them both. This time it was twin boys, and Lucas paced the floor outside their bedroom while the midwife helped Zara through the difficult birth. When he was finally allowed in and saw Zara, exhausted but beaming, with a baby in each arm, he knelt beside the bed and kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. "You are amazing," he said. "Absolutely amazing." They named the twins Samuel and Benjamin, and the house that had once seemed too quiet now rang with the noise and chaos of 4 children. Lucas hired more help so he could spend more time with his family, refusing to be the kind of father who was always absent, always working. He taught James to ride and rope. He read to Rose every night, even when he was bone-tired from a long day. He walked the floor with crying babies and changed diapers, and never once complained about the work that came with fatherhood. One evening, when the twins were a year old and finally sleeping through the night, Lucas and Zara found themselves alone on the porch again, the way they had been the night he proposed. So much had changed since then, but some things remained the same. The stars were just as bright, the prairie just as vast, and the love between them just as strong, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven over years of shared life. "You remember the night I asked you to marry me?" Lucas asked, his arm around Zara's shoulders. "Of course. I remember everything about that night. I told you I could not promise you riches or an easy life. You did, and you were right. This life has not been easy." Lucas looked down at her, concerned. "Do you regret it, marrying me, staying here?" Zara turned in his arms so she could look him full in the face. Lucas Pearson, I have never regretted a single moment with you. This life, this ranch, our children, it is more than I ever dreamed of having. You saved my life that night in the fire, but you have done so much more than that. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love that is true and constant. How could I ever regret that? Lucas kissed her then, deep and slow, the kiss of a man who knew exactly how lucky he was. I love you, Zara, just as much as I did the day we married, more even. I love you too. Always. They sat together as the night deepened, holding hands, comfortable in the silence. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch sprawled, the result of years of hard work and dedication. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joy but somehow witnessing it anyway. Lucas thought back to that June evening in 1878, when he had been a lonely rancher loading supplies onto a wagon, with no idea that his entire life was about to change. He thought about running into that burning building, driven by instinct and basic human decency, never imagining that the woman he saved would become the center of his entire world. He thought about how strange fate was, how a terrible tragedy had become the beginning of the greatest blessing of his life. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked, noticing his faraway expression. "The fire. How it brought you to me." "That was a terrible thing, though. People lost everything that night. I know, and I would never wish for such a thing to happen, but I cannot help being grateful for where it led me." "Is that wrong?" Zara considered it. "I do not think so. We cannot change what happened. We can only be grateful for the good that came from it. And you, Lucas Pearson, are the very best good that ever came into my life." As the years continued to pass, Lucas and Zara's love became the stuff of local legend. People in Wichita told the story of the cowboy who ran through flames to save his future wife, and young people hearing it would sigh romantically, hoping to find such love themselves. The Pearson children grew up knowing their parents' story, understanding that the life they enjoyed had begun with an act of incredible bravery. James grew tall and strong, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch work as Lucas aged. Rose became a teacher, fulfilling the dream her father had once held for himself, and Lucas could not have been more proud. The twins, inseparable as they had been from birth, went into business together, opening a feed store in Wichita that prospered quickly. Through it all, Lucas and Zara remained devoted to each other. They were the couple everyone pointed to as an example, the proof that true love existed, that romance was not just for storybooks. They held hands at church. They danced together at town gatherings, Lucas still as attentive to his wife as he had been when they were newlyweds. They grew old together gracefully, Lucas's hair going gray, Zara's face showing the lines of a life well lived. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate the couple whose love story had become legendary. There were speeches and toasts, food and music and laughter. At the end of the evening, when the guests had gone home and the children were cleaning up, Lucas and Zara slipped away to the porch, to their spot, where so many important moments of their life together had taken place. 25 years, Zara said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into this, Lucas said, gesturing at the house behind them, full of their children and the life they had built. Into us. I would not change a single moment, even the hard parts, the struggles. They made us who we are. Lucas pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting against him as perfectly as she always had. Do you think about it sometimes? How different your life would have been if that fire had never happened? Sometimes, Zara admitted. I would probably still be in that boarding house, working at the store alone. I might have married eventually, but it would not have been for love. It would have been for practicality, for security. I would never have known what I was missing. She tilted her head back to look at him. And you? I would have stayed a lonely rancher, married to the land, slowly turning into a bitter old bachelor. I would never have known about the kind of love we have. I would never have had our children, never known the joy of family. He kissed the top of her head. That fire destroyed so much that night, but it gave me everything that matters. They stood there together under the stars, the same stars that had watched them fall in love all those years ago. The prairie stretched out around them, dark and vast and beautiful. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. In the barn, the horses moved restlessly in their stalls. Inside the house, their children laughed at some joke. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary life, except that it was not ordinary at all. It was extraordinary, because they were together, because they had built this life from ashes and determination and love that would not be denied. Lucas and Zara Pearson lived many more years together, well into their old age, always in love, always grateful for the fire that had brought them together. When Lucas finally died at the age of 78, he went peacefully in his sleep, Zara holding his hand. She followed him 2 years later, having spent the intervening time surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling and retelling the story of how their grandfather had run through flames to save her. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside Wichita, their graves marked with a simple stone that bore both their names and a single line. Love forged in fire, eternal as the stars. And on summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, people swore they could see 2 figures on the porch of the old Pearson ranch house, sitting close together, holding hands, watching the sunset the way they had done for so many years. The house had passed to James and eventually to his children, but everyone in the family knew that it still belonged in some essential way to Lucas and Zara, whose love had made it a home. Their story was told and retold, becoming part of the fabric of Wichita's history. The burned ruins of the old boarding house were eventually cleared away, replaced by a new building, but old-timers remembered. They remembered the fire, and they remembered the cowboy who had not hesitated, who had run through flames to save a woman he did not know, and in doing so had found his soulmate. It was the kind of love story that people needed to believe in, especially in hard times. It reminded them that courage could be rewarded, that good people still existed, that true love was worth waiting for and fighting for. It reminded them that sometimes, out of the ashes of disaster, something beautiful and lasting could grow. The Pearson Ranch remained in the family for generations, each new owner hearing the story of how it all began, of the brave cowboy and the grateful woman who fell so deeply in love that nothing, not time nor hardship nor death itself, could diminish it. The porch where Lucas proposed was carefully maintained, considered almost sacred ground. Young couples in the family would sit there, hoping some of that legendary love would rub off on them. And maybe it did, because the Pearson family became known for strong marriages, for couples who stayed together through thick and thin, who loved each other truly and completely. They would say it was in the blood, that Lucas and Zara had set an example that their descendants could not help but follow. The love story that began in fire had become a legacy, passed down through generations, a reminder that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, that courage and kindness can change everything, and that true love, once found, never really ends. It simply transforms, becoming part of the land, part of the air, part of the eternal prairie sky that had witnessed it all those years ago and would go on witnessing it forever. Lucas and Zara's story was complete. their love proven and tested and triumphant. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a family that would carry their memory forward. The burning building that could have been Zara's tomb had instead been the doorway to her greatest happiness. The cowboy who ran through flames had found something more precious than he could have imagined. And in the end, that was the truest thing of all. That love was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap through fire and smoke into the unknown. Because on the other side of that fear, that danger, that uncertainty, waited the one person who would make everything make sense, who would turn a house into a home and a life into an adventure worth living. The fire had burned for one night in June 1878, but the love it sparked burned for a lifetime and beyond, warming everyone it touched, lighting the way for those who came after, proving that sometimes the most terrifying moments can lead to the most beautiful destinations. And that, more than anything else, was what people remembered when they told the story of Lucas and Zara Pearson. Not the fear or the danger, but the love that followed, as constant and enduring as the Kansas prairie itself.